Niin, hyvää iltaa kaikki täällä paikan päällä Joensuussa Itä-Suomen yliopistolla ja myös kaikki siellä Zoomissa. Tervetuloa Karjalan teologisen seuran yleisöiltaan tänään ja ihan muutamia käytännön asioita ihan ensiksi. Meillä oli tätä ennen Karjalan teologisen seuran vuosikokous ja oma nimeni on siis Heta Hurskainen ja olen Karjalan teologisen seuran nyt entinen puheenjohtaja. Saimme uuden puheenjohtajan tälle seuralle ja uusi puheenjohtaja on Lotta Valve, yliopiston lehtori ja teologian tohtori. Täällä työskentelee Itä-Suomen yliopistossa. Onnittelut vielä Lotalle tätä kautta. Tää kyllä. Live-uploadit Lotalle. Ja nyt meillä on siis tänään vuosikokousesitelmä ja itse esitelmä nauhoitetaan. Eli sen aikaa, kun meidän puhuja puhuu, niin meillä on nauhoitus käynnissä, mutta sitten kun aloitetaan keskustelu, niin nauhoitus laitetaan pois päältä. Ja tänään esitelmä tulee olemaan englanniksi ja kohta esittelen sitten myöskin hyvin lyhyesti englanniksi puhuimme aiheen. Mutta meillä on siis vuosikokous puhujana Suvi-Maria Saarelainen, hän on apulaisprofessori täällä Itä-Suomen yliopistossa ja hyvinvointiteologian ja työelämätaitojen apulaisprofessori. Hänen tutkimuksensa keskittyy myöskin tämmöiseen eksistentiaaliseen hyvinvointiin ja tänään hän erityisesti puhuu ikääntyvien hyvinvoinnista. Ja muutenkin hänen tutkimusintresseissään on merkityksellisyyden ja merkityksellisyyden kokemisen aiheet. So, welcome to everybody to this Karelian Theological Society's lecture this evening. We are honored to have Suvi-Maria Saarelainen, Associate Professor in Theology of Wellbeing and Working Life Skills, here today to speak about navigating existential crises in nursing homes. Suvi-Maria Saarelainen works here at the University of Eastern Finland, and her research interest is focused on the experience of meaning during and in life changes and transitions of life. And today she will speak about navigating existential crisis in nursing homes. As care needs increase with age, the sense of meaningfulness in life can be significantly challenged, leading to various existential crises. Nursing homes represent a particularly difficult environment for older individuals where concerns about the finality of life, isolation, and meaninglessness are heightened by daily encounters with loss, illness, and bereavement. And today her presentation examines how chaplains perceive their ability to support residents facing these crises. So, floor is yours, Suvi-Maria.
Thank you, Heta. And I'll start with this. Sorry, but I want to see you as well. So very happy to be here today, and I promised that I'll be talking around 40 minutes, and I'll just also open my own computer just to be able to track the time and then my notes. So I'm going to be going between two computers. But very happy to be here today, and I'm going to be speaking in English just to be inclusive for all of our participants and also online participants. And just to see how this goes. Okay, here you can see the presentation of my structure of my presentation. So first, I will shortly talk about silent crises that I consider that is currently ongoing in our care system, particularly in care of the older people. I will shortly introduce a concept of meaning in life, what I'm talking about, and especially what does meaning in life mean in the context of old age, and then some notions about what does it mean to live life in a context of nursing home. So in Finnish, we would talk about hoivakoti or something like that, palveluasumisen, erityisen palveluasumisen yksiköt. And then some notions about what is competence, how it's a bit actually difficult to define competence, but I think there's something there as well. And then our empirical section will focus on 2 studies, what have been conducted, and focusing on religious and spiritual needs of older people, as well as how older people experience meaninglessness and existential loneliness according to chaplains. And also in the end of this presentation, we will shortly go to this competence building and what is needed according to chaplains. And then we conclude something shortly. But what is this silent crisis of care that is going on? I think this is not only a Finnish problem, this is actually a very global problem, but in aging societies, as in Europe, the well-being of older persons will be increasingly important due to this high number of older persons. And actually, in Eastern Finland, we are doing better in many ways. Actually, because the level of care, frequency of meetings of care is better when comparing to Southern Finland, for instance. We also know Nader has just recently submitted an article showing that meaning in life among older people is higher in Eastern Finland than in Southern Finland. So there's something that is actually positive here as well. But overall in Finland, the number of people aged 85 and over is expected to double in a near time future. And I don't think in Finland we're ready for this, or none in the European countries. But we also know that within advancing care needs and higher the age, higher the needs of care, the experience of meaningfulness becomes pressured. And that is likely to lead existential concerns such as existential loneliness, meeting the experience of mortality in sense of I am gonna die, but also meeting the loss of the loved ones one after another. So all sorts of existential burden is increasing. But kind of the other angle, not just existential concerns, because studies also show that life can be meaningful also in old age. Our literature review, whose first author was Julie Vissers from Leuven University, shows that in our current understanding is that meaning in life is different in old age. There are these general dimensions that is general for people in all ages. Julie's literature review shows that also this experience of coherence and purpose are important in old age. So when we're talking about coherence, we mean this red thread. We have this comprehension that life went how it should be. So perhaps in Finnish, we would say that we have this punainen lanka in our life. We can see that things happened for a reason. And this is important in all ages, also in old age. But also the experience of purpose. What is purpose of my life? What makes current moment purposeful? In younger age, purpose is driven from the future. In old age, purpose is more here and now. But then Julie discovered that there are these unique dimensions that becomes increasingly important in old age. And it is linked to this coherence, but the experience of reconciled of the past is highly important. Fulfilled purpose, felt coherence, and continuation. So these types of dimensions become more important when people become old. But it's interesting that Julie did this literature review and found out that the current research notifies these things. Hardly any of the current research take this as a starting point. So even though in our studies of old age, we know that this is how it goes, still we tend to use these general dimensions of meaning in life. Perhaps not to go too deep on that, but just a notion. that sometimes people who are doing research know things, but then they don't really act on it. So in these types of studies, there are a lot we could do even better. But why study nursing homes as a context of life and meaningfulness or existential issues? We know from the previous studies that life in nursing homes as such is quite challenging. Especially the transition to nursing home has been found especially, difficult point, because there is high depressive burden, high existential levels of existential suffering, and as such, moving into a nursing home easily triggers existential concerns. And often this transition to nursing home is forced. It's hardly ever an individual's own choice. In best case, it would be in the individual's choice, but in real life, it hardly ever happens like that. But in nursing homes, we also see that level of antidepressant drugs use is very high. And if we look, for instance, in Finland, we can see that 45% of our older people living in nursing homes are medicated for depressive burden. And that is huge if we consider nearly half. And one of our hypotheses was in our international study that this is due to existential issues. So that they are treated for depression, but what they would actually need would be, some sort of a counseling and discussions and encounters. But this is an ongoing project, so I don't know the results yet, but let's see how it goes. But also one reason might be that from the diagnostic perspectives, symptoms of geriatric depression, they overlap with existential concerns. Also, if one is depressed, one is likely to experience meaninglessness, hopelessness, and loneliness. So it's hard to make a diagnostical distinction of what is what. And there aren't really working instruments to make a differentiation, whether it's existential concerns or depression. Let's see. So from the theoretical perspective and background studies, I've shown that the phenomena as such is quite complex, but so is the comprehending competence. And this is something that we've been discussing also, people who are now in this room, but perhaps not to go too deeply on it. But the current research, for instance, suggests that professional competence, it is a multidimensional concept that combines, for instance, knowledge, practical skills, professional values, and attitudes. So basically it means that everything that we are impacts to our professional competence, right? And from the perspective of care professionals or chaplaincy, for instance, developing this competence is essential because it directly impacts to the quality of care. And from the competence, we can also see at least two levels. There are these potential skills that are activated in certain situations, and qualities guided by motivation and attitude that influence our practical actions. At least two levels. But I think these potential skills, it's quite interesting in that way that these might be skills that we don't really recognize as individuals. They are things that happen or when actions take place, we automatically react one way or another. So we have this potential. And I think what comes to existential care, this potential can also activate if there is room for it. But then when we look current measures that are available to study these phenomena, for instance, competence of spiritual care, they often tend to assess implementation of what kind of care takes place, how quality of care can be implemented in everyday working life. It also includes measuring things like personal support and patient counseling and referral to others. So it looks like quite nice. And for instance, this Löwen et al. Scale has been developed and used in several countries. So it actually seems that these types of scales are transferable from one culture or language to another. From a Finnish perspective, I think it's a bit, I don't know, challenging that this spiritual competence, it really means like hengellisyys hoitotyössä. So when we're talking about existential care, we don't have that large items that would actually perhaps take into consideration everything that we comprehend as existential care or existential care needs. There are several scales, but I'm just showing you a couple. This is also very perhaps interesting US-based scale in that way that this was a scale developed by Oxhandler and Pargament. So those of you are in psychology for religion know that Pargament is the guru in the field. And in the US, they built this scale of religious and spiritual competence across professions. So it seems that there is also a scale that can study these competence aspects from perspectives of nursing, chaplaincy, MDs, and varieties of occupations. From a Finnish perspective, again, a bit puzzling that in the US scale, the largest kind of umbrella is religiosity. Spirituality is seen under religiosity, and then again, existential dimension becomes something that is only under an umbrella of spirituality and religiosity. So perhaps something that we wouldn't in Finland use as such. But personally, I think we have a very good, already 15-year-old review article available, but we don't have scale based on Lacour and Vid. I know that Nora has been seeing this figure for quite many times, for instance, but the idea of this paper is to kind of like map the comprehension that how does what happens for an individual when one has to face an often health crisis. And Lacour and Vid did an extensive review article showing that when individual goes through these health crises, these spheres of secular, religious, and spiritual are likely to overlap depending on the values of an individual. But always in health crises, one way or another, there is me, my bodily experience, who goes through this crisis of life. So therefore, I think that when we are talking about competence, we should talk about religious, spiritual, and secular existential needs, but also we should be able to comprehend these bodily aspects. We should also comprehend that competence in healthcare setting should also include cultural and contextual aspects impacting to meaning making what is going on. And then when going through a literature, I also found this chaplaincy competence. It's not a scale, it's rather results of qualitative study from Robert G. Anderson already from 2004. And Anderson says that when talking about chaplaincy competence, we should rather understand it include the capacity to know and explain one's own spiritual and cultural setting. So Anderson seems to go to that direction, that chaplain should be able to know, who am I first? And that's like a first level of the competence. Then the capacity of identify and learn about the otherness. What kind of automatically would push me away, because it's something that it's kind of scary. It's not part of who am I. It's something that makes me a bit, I don't know, hesitant. And there should be also capacity to demonstrate multi-spiritual and cultural attitudes and skills, and also capacity to identify contextual and relational barriers and limitations, and capacity to demonstrate respect and willingness to learn from others. So I'd say that this Anderson 5 stages of chaplaincy competence would be transferable also to other occupations, perhaps, but we don't have studies on that, but perhaps in the future. But these were like very many ways to see how competence is studied in the healthcare setting, also from the chaplaincy perspective, but also from varieties of professions. I'm looking at the watch, so I'm going to empirical notions, not to focus to theoretical stuff too much. I want to show you 2 different data sets or analysis or even results of the 2 different projects, just to discuss more about what competence is or how could it be seen better. And first of the empirical research was gathered by Jari Pirhonen, who is a docent in gerontology, but he is also a master of theology. So in part of his theological studies in Helsinki, he had this qualitative study, and we've been working quite much with that data set afterwards. And then there was another data gathering with me and our student assistant Johanna Reemi, who is currently, I believe, finalizing her master thesis in systematic theology, but she was also working with me for a couple of months in this existential concerns and competence project. And together with Johanna, we interviewed chaplains through Teams, online interviews in Teams setting. And with Johanna, she was responsible of doing the data analysis together with me as well. But what is interesting, 2 different data sets, partly same participants, very different questionnaire. So Jari was focused on religious and spiritual needs, and our focus was in existential concerns, particularly in meaninglessness and existential loneliness. All of these participants had this CPE-based training, pastoral care education. So they were really into this chaplaincy business, so to say. And now I'm really summing up our findings and what have we been like the main ideas of Jari's work. We have a couple of papers that were recently published, and chaplains forming a meaningful relationship is focused on how chaplains are able to form really deep relationship with people who are severely dementic. And then the second paper, pastoral care, it's more of a theological reflection of hope and how hope can be supported with people who have a strong dementia. And perhaps one way or another, in both of these articles, we can see that embodiment is crucial. This embodied aspect of pastoral care becomes evident. Chaplains utilize their physical presence and nurturing the gestures to establish the connection. Often they use touch and sensory experiences to convey comfort and embody the sense of sacredness. Pastors or chaplains were extremely capable in this emotional support. They provided emotional comfort by offering warmth and encouragement when participants or the older people one way or another experienced fears or anxieties. Particularly, they gave us a explanation on what happens when people come to nursing homes and they might feel lost. They could experience that they didn't know where they are, who they are, where is their own room, is this my home now? So chaplains were there to navigate this very difficult transition period with the older persons. And then chaplains also discuss about these interpersonal relations, and they found their work as deeply relational. They also discussed about the fact that being a chaplain in a nursing home is something different than the other carers do, because chaplains have more time available and they don't write anything down. They are there to meet the person and support the person. But at the same time, they also discussed largely about the fact that there could be like 50% of a chaplain who had 2 houses. So they felt that they don't have time enough, but still they knew that they are in a very good position, that they had much more time compared to nurses, for instance. Chaplains also, of course, talked about these religious and spiritual aspects, as Jari's study focused on that. But what was interesting, that chaplains highlighted this sensitivity for religious and spiritual aspects. It was very important for them that they would not force it in a one way or another. They would only start this discussion on religious or spiritual matters if they had cues. For instance, if they could see that someone was wearing a cross, or they could see a magazine or psalm book or something like that, that gave them a hint that, okay, this person might be somehow interested in these ideas. They also discussed about this maternal attention, and some of them actually said that they have this maternal aspect in their care. It was actually a male participant who talked that part of his work is this maternal attention. It's like caregiving and calming down and touching and holding hands and humming, sometimes lullabies, or finding something else that would calm a person down if needed. And then they also discussed about this bodily memory, that in some occasions, when older person who had this sensory experience, it could be a touch, music, scent, that kind of like brought the person back. And there was this connection and clearness. Of course, it was a memory outburst from somewhere in the past, but all of a sudden, this person with a deep dementia was there, and there was like this strong connection. But also, chaplains discussed about this presence of mystic, presence of God, embodied acts that communicated God's love for the chaplains and through the chaplains as well. They discussed quite thoroughly about the emotional support, relational focus, but then also this religious and spiritual continuation that was needed. Because if you have a severe dementia, you don't really remember that you might be religious. Some of them would remember it, but not all. And the chaplains told, for instance, that there could be a person that wasn't really in the room, but when the holy ritual began, like Eucharistia, then someone might start praying or singing if there was a known psalm. There could be people that couldn't really know how to communicate in everyday life, but they were able to sing psalms without any issues, or make a cross mark when getting the communion. So there was this connection of rituals, what was especially meaningful for dementic people. So perhaps one way or another, it could be summarized that what chaplains did to support the religious and spiritual aspects of people in nursing homes, it was something beyond basic care. But it was something also that the chaplains comprehended that it was very crucial that they had this means to maintain dignity and therefore also means to support spiritual well-being of the older people. And also this, they talk about reminiscence therapy and discussing about the past with the older people, because past memories was often the things that people with dementia were able to connect. Because I think it's between age 6 and 30 years when we form this memory bump. So when we start to have dementia, what happens in our lives between ages 6 and 30, those are the years we are likely to remember, even everything else is gone. So if you consider and think your life in the age of 6 and 30, that is something you are likely to remember even forever, perhaps. So therefore, for the older people, they start to talk about what happened in the youth and early years, because it really comes more meaningful. But also it provides a bridge to connect with older person with dementia. It doesn't matter if it didn't happen today or yesterday. Even if it happened like 50 years ago, you can still talk about it like it happened now. And then this embodied aspect, as already discussed, but also it was interesting how strongly chaplains talked about the significance of touch, because us as a theologians and psychologists, we know that the touching is not really what we are recommended to do that often, or it's even contested. But in this context, it's crucial to be able to touch to calm people down. Perhaps just a notion on this goes to this affirming belonging. And the chaplains highlighted that they found that somehow this spiritual and religious aspect and existential aspect supported this experience of belonging for the older people, even in their changed life situations. It was found as a crucial aspect. But when going to these larger questions of existential needs, and one of our articles focuses especially on existential loneliness and how chaplains encounter existential loneliness, and whether they feel that they are competent as chaplains to support people with existential needs. And I believe that by far we've already learned that living in nursing homes as such is likely to arouse existential needs. So our study points out that chaplains have this superpower of listening and being present. They are really good at fully being present. That is their main job, to be there, have a small mouth and large ears, how we would say in chaplaincy research. But also it's very hard but important for chaplains to hear instead of fix. So when they hear these questions of why and why me, or missing my spouse, or why did God allow. You just have to bear with the difficult emotion. And that was found as a crucial. And then validating the experience. Yes, it was really horrible, and I don't know why would God allow. Instead of trying to speak it off and explain that God doesn't abandon, or none of us are given too much. Because it might be the real experience that someone feels that God has abandoned me. So what did chaplains do for that? They just sat down and listened and prayed if needed. But also this facilitation of person-oriented interaction, and pastors, chaplains had this experience of taking the connection, allowing this dialogical space to take place by often talking about the past, asking small questions, and therefore facilitating the conversation that would later provide a room for existential discussions to appear. But very interestingly, not mentioned in none of our theoretical discussions, but very strongly discussed about the chaplains, was this tangible practices to meet existential needs and practical help. For instance, one of the older persons said that he or she would love to have in Finnish, I think it was like nuori koivunoksa. So like, I don't know, birch branch, basically. And that is something that they did in his or her home. So the chaplain went and fetched some birch branches for the older people to feel like home. So very practical and very tangible, but also making this religious care available if needed. But this emotional endurance was also a fact that chaplains felt probably most difficult in their work, because enduring difficult emotions was so strong. They discussed about older persons and how they could be very strong in the emotional outburst. They could be aggressive even, and blaming chaplains for earlier difficult meetings with the nurse, for instance. And also the fact that in chaplaincy encounters, the chaplain never really knows was the meeting meaningful for the other person or not. So it is about handling this uncertainty, that whether our meeting was enough, or whether my presence is needed again, or also about the fact that I don't know if the person will be alive after a week or after a summer holiday. So all sorts of uncertainties are present in chaplaincy work in nursing homes. And therefore, the self-care is crucial. This is very demanding job also for the chaplains themselves. And perhaps from this idea, we can move to our last section. What is then the experience of personal competence, especially in this nursing home setting? And what did our participants say about it? What supports their personal competence? And they discuss about the education and how crucial is the education, especially the CPE-based education. One of them actually said that none of the theological studies has done anything. So she was like, no, I didn't get any of the competence needed for the theological studies. Well, I don't know. She wasn't graduated from here. but still, I think it's an interesting question, that where do you build your competence if it's not your basic studies? One of them said that because she studied history was more, because she learned to comprehend why people do stuff and how what we did in our past impacts to the future. So very interesting. Then they talk about the self-reflection, how crucial it is to go regular supervision, so in työnohjaus basically, and they have a peer reflection as well, and then the experience. Take it until you make it, basically. That was their key message, that the first years are hard, but when you are just there and you are there long enough, the work will get easier in an emotional level. And then they talk about how important it is to have their own support networks. But also they reflected how meaningful the work actually is, that there is this deeper meaning in their work. They are able to support those ones who really need it, and perhaps those who are in a difficult spot due to financial issues or due to just living in nursing homes. And often the chaplain might be the only one visiting regularly. So what then forms the barriers for existential care according to our chaplains? I think by so far I've shown that they are quite capable, but still they feel incompetent. They feel that they are not doing enough. They feel that they are not educated enough. And then what was alarming, these structural problems. One of them said that I don't know whether I want to be the system that allows us to neglect our older people day after a day. So it is this high ethical distress that they see in their daily life as a chaplain. To conclude, what is existential care and its competence in nursing home setting? I go back to Anderson and Lacour and Witt, but slightly modified based on what our chaplains told. So first, of course, engaging with diverse values, knowing that religious and spiritual issues are not meaningful for all, not all the older people are interested in that. In Finland, we tend to consider that older people are very religious or that they believe as a church teaches. But it actually seems that also our older people have very diverse religious ideas as well. So engaging with diverse values. Sensitivity to contextual barriers. In nursing homes, the contextual barrier itself is actually the nursing home. Chaplains are also outsiders in our healthcare systems. So there are very many barriers that they have to tackle in order to find the route, to find the people who actually need the help. And the capacity of meeting the otherness becomes dementia. Dementic people might be even scary every now and then. They might be aggressive. They might touch you in a way you don't want. But also they are very vulnerable. They might start crying. And they might consider that the chaplain is father or mother, or lost sibling or something. So levels of otherness in dementia are severe. And embodiment was strongly presented as part of the care. The touch was needed. And then the adaptability and learning from the residents, so that they were willing to learn the person and one's own life story and needs, existential needs arising from personal needs. And then last, but probably not the least, perhaps even the first, commitment to self-care. You cannot become a chaplain in a daily life if you don't commit to make professional boundaries, if you don't take care of your own well-being, because they also say that if you're not doing well, you cannot support the others. So I think that was also the one lacking piece in our current theoretical frameworks so far. So what do we know? Importance of chaplaincy competence. Chaplains play a critical role providing this personalized, compassionate care. There is this need for organizational support. Earlier studies also show that existential care requires a layered system where it is clearly defined who has the role for existential and spiritual care. So therefore, there's also policies and tools that are needed. We know that one people cannot solve everything. So therefore, there is this call for systemic change. Existential care is something that should be comprehended as a joint multi-professional work. And therefore, we really need to consider how to support our older people with existential care needs, but also how should we build our curriculum development different so that existential care competence would be largely available, also others than theologians. Perhaps I'll say thank you. Kiitos.